headphone maybe? Who's teaching this one, Georgie? Mine, crisis management, Georgie, right?
Keeping it in our thoughts as Delta is working its way towards you. Please feel free, reach out to us if you need anything. We'll be reaching out to those counties, those housing authorities, again, after the fact, or when we know more information. But again, if you need anything, prep work, let us know. Please feel free. So let's go ahead and start talking crisis. And we're really talking about, and getting in the context of COVID-19, but it really does work for natural disasters and other things as well. So this is something you can, as a board, as executive director, as staff, you can take and really apply it to any different situation, anything other than the normal. And again, crisis sometimes you see as a negative. Sometimes it could be a positive. So it's really a change in what's normal for you. I think that's what we really want to make sure. But again, generally we're talking arguably on a net crisis, it's a negative impact on your individuals, your staff, your agency, your residents in that situation. So crisis here, again, COVID-19 is going to be a little bit of our background, but an emergency disaster. Again, across the nation, we have a national emergency on COVID-19 pandemic. And again, from time to time, we have the natural disaster pieces as well. There can be some discussion of whether it is strategic crisis or an actual organizational crisis. Was it a problem in the actual planning? Do we not have something that actually we thought through this process? And most of that now generally is not as concerning as the organizational crisis, where we actually do have a plan in place and the plan is not working. And it's not meeting the needs of our agency, our staff, and our residents for the housing authority perspective. There's usually going to be some key turning point. We'll talk a little more about that. But what is that point that kind of tips you over the scale? You're managing, you're doing okay, you're keeping up, you're keeping your head above water in a sense, and then all of a sudden, the next wave comes, and that's what is a tipping point and gets you into the crisis status. And how do we now start digging ourselves back up and getting our heads above water again? So that's that turning point. And then decision making. Decision making becomes much more focused in a sense. And we'll talk about it. There's really urgent decisions and important decisions that need to be made. And then we'll talk about, again, a little bit about how those can be very different and how sometimes they become very similar. And how do we handle those situations of urgent decisions versus important decisions, and what does that mean? When all of this comes together, this, especially for over a long period of time, that's when we get into this pandemic discussion. Again, larger. We've been doing this now almost 8 months since March. For those of you who have are working from home, you can see I'm working from home. I've been working from home since about March 17th, right around there, I think 16, 17, 18. I left the office that, it became a voluntary. We didn't have to go back into the office. Public transportation was becoming an issue going into DC. So we went home and we started working from home. Took our kind of computer, took some stuff, but never planned on being here for 8 months and probably longer. So again, that changes. Then I would have taken different things from my office if I knew I was going to be here for 8 months rather than 3 weeks, which was, again, 3-4 weeks was the original thought, potentially. All right. So values. Our decisions are driven by our values. And even a pandemic, that's the same thing. What is important to us? We'll need to take a look and see what those values, what those value drivers is what they're called. What are they, and how do we make sure those are part of our discussion in during your decision-making processes. So those value drivers, let's see here. Sorry about that. Here we go. Okay, two really big ones for us as housing authorities. And really for any organization. So this can be taken to a nonprofit, this can be taken to the housing authority, even amongst the board itself, even amongst the staff themselves. So it can be subgroups of this. So keeping people safe, always important. Really making sure we're, again, the PPE, the avoiding infection. How do we make sure our people are safe? Okay, how do we make sure our people are safe? How do we make sure our residents are safe? Two different decision-making points there. Are we opening our lobbies for staff, open our buildings for staff to come in? And what does that look like? Then are we opening our lobbies for residents or the public to come in? And how do we balance that? So that's, again, helping others avoid infection is we have all our staff coming together. Do we have the spacing, or does that become a potential infection issue? And then they take that infection back home with them or to other locations. So again, by keeping our people safe, we help keep others safe as well. Again, that contact tracing, who touches who, and the domino effect that sometimes we have there. Supporting those caring for sick family members. Not only sick families, but even think of us as children as well. So it kind of fits in this conversation. March, again, 15, 16, 17, 18, right around there, my daughter's school closed as well. And they switched over to an online version of school. That becomes a much bigger issue if I wasn't able to be at home. Luckily, my wife generally works from home regularly. So now we have both parents at home and with my daughter through most of the summer. But that makes an issue. How do we make sure that if children are at home, that they're supervised, that there's a parent there, so even if our office may not close fully, or may only partially close, or may not close at all in certain situations, but now we have schools closed. How does that interaction work? And how do we make sure by supporting our staff, supporting our people, how do we make sure we get the best out of our staff while supporting what is important to them as well? And helping those who are economically disrupted. Again, we saw that HUD, this is what HUD does, HUD did. So it's important to make sure we talk about that. For our residents, this is a huge issue. For our staff in certain situations, this is a huge issue. Particularly our staff with spouses or other incomes in the household that now may not be there. You saw the unemployment numbers skyrocket. Millions of people went on unemployment. It still takes time, though, from the time you become unemployed to get unemployment. What happens during those couple of weeks to make sure the families, keep food on the table and can do what they need to do? So again, we help that on the resident side by making sure we reach out to our residents. If they were economically disrupted, if they lost their job, cut hours, coming in and doing an interim recertification. And now we can lower your rent. Even if there's eviction moratoriums, we still want to lower your rent so you don't owe that money down the line. That's the important part. Even right now, the CDC order for evictions doesn't stop rent. The rent keeps accumulating. On January 1st, it's all going to be due. But if we can go with that family, recertify their rent based on their new lower income or loss of income, they can lower that amount that's owed in January. And that can be very helpful and probably will lead to fewer evictions across the board for our families in the public housing and the voucher programs. For organization-wise, so that's a lot of the people. Organization need to make sure you're operating safely. If you decide to stay open, did you put up plexiglass dividers between your staff and the public? Are you putting out, if there's paperwork that needs to be distributed, are you putting that outside your building in a drop box of some sort? Healthcare workers, housing authority staff, a lot of coordination sometimes in that process, particularly if you have healthcare workers on site. There are a lot of housing authorities that do have some kind of healthcare facility on site, and now that becomes a potential hotspot for people. When people are sick, they go to the healthcare facility, and then making sure that facility is safe as well. A lot of that needs to make sure the staff, so not only the business side of it. HUD helped out with the business side to a point. We need more, but right now, for the public housing side, you received about 2 months worth of public housing funds, additional funds this year from the CARES Act. Also, the CARES Act provided for the voucher program administrative fee, additional funds. Up to almost a little over 4 months of that has gone on to housing authorities. 2 months in the first group, a little more than 2 months in the second batch that came out. So that is some of the financial components. Because even if some tenants haven't paid rent, you now have a little bit of backup in the public housing side of things. And also then the CARES Act funds lets you do activities through your normal regular activities that you do in public housing, operating fund, capital fund, admin fee. Those funds can be used for those normal activities as well. So in a sense, it can help boost if you're paying additional salaries to bring in additional cleaning, additional supplies, PPE, personal protective equipment, all of those pieces, if they're purchased and needed, this funding can help. I want to remind you, I didn't say at the beginning, but if you have any questions, please jump in. There's a chat box. Just click on the chat box, type your questions in there. Make sure at least the panelists can, that's me, but you can also click it to everyone, can see your chat. And if you send to everyone on the meeting will see it, and that means I will see it as well, and then we'll jump into that going forward. All right. Once we have our values, consider values. What's important to us? Again, we back up all of this, keeping people safe, keeping our organization up and running, our housing authority up and running. Two very big pieces. Some of that is staff-based, some of that's leadership-based through the commissioners as well. Very important to make sure the commissioners and the staff, particularly through the executive director, have that communication for both of these to make sure things run smoothly. And sometimes they touch each other. Additional salaries or bonus pay may be approved by the board and handed to the provided through the executive director to the staff. All right. This is that key dilemma, looking at what happens in your decision-making process. This is a key to any kind of crisis. How are you going to make decisions, and what decisions are you going to make? And this is, again, in a sense, overly simple, but I think it's a nice way of thinking about it and a way to think about it to make sure that we deal with each decision properly. And here we're talking about, do we go fast or do we go slow? Okay, that is what decisions need to be made. Urgent decisions, you need to go fast. It's urgent because it needs to be dealt with now. In a natural disaster, so the roof, there's a hole in the roof from a hurricane winds. There's a hole in the roof, there's a leak. That's an urgent decision. We need to make sure that the unit is made safe. A broken glass, windows broken. We need to make sure that emergency work order is completed and it is made safe. Okay, so that's urgent. Important is a slower process. It's an important decision and needs to be thought through. This might be our boilers for our heating system are 25 years old. Do we maintain them and stretch out their useful life? Or do we replace them? That's not a decision that's made overnight. That's a decision that goes through a process. Okay, because that's an important decision to make sure we have proper heating and HVAC through our units. So that tends to be a slower process. It takes time. Not more time than it needs, but it takes time to go through what is the some study to see what makes the most sense to replace or to maintain. Have you gone past the maintenance side of things? So that's where we need to make sure that we're making those decisions. In a crisis, in a disaster, in a pandemic, what happens? You get decisions, and you have to categorize those decisions as either fast or slow. Very hard to do both at the same time. Okay, urgent decisions may be very important to the situation, but they're more urgent than important. So we have to make a decision quickly. We need to do it with the best information we have on hand, but we may not feel comfortable making a decision. This is kind of sometimes that gut decision. What do we do to make sure our residents are safe right now? We need to make sure to get them to the next, phase. So again, very important decision, but the urgency of it overrides the importance. And then on the other side of things, we can shut down our office, and then we can make the important decision of how we're going to reopen our building. We may, the county, the state, national, whatever the rules in place for opening and closing buildings. We can have 0% people in the building. We can have 25, 55, 75% people in the building. Then we can decide, okay, the county or the city says we can have 50% of our staff in based on our square footage. We may go a little bit slower. We'll say we'll only do 25% for the first month, or the first 2 weeks of that process. That gives us time to make sure social distancing is proper. We have the plexiglass dividers, proper mask usage, proper flow chart of how the hallways, one directional hallways, and making sure, all of a sudden we haven't blocked off the bathrooms that no one can get to the bathroom because of the one-way pass. So again, those are important decisions for safety, for your staff, for your residents, but they can take a little bit more time because you've made the situation safe by having your staff work at home, by having online meetings with residents if needed. Okay, so there's where a decision can sometimes switch from urgent. Do we open or close? No, we close. That's the urgent decision. Reopening is the important, slower decision that goes forward. So again, you need to make sure you're looking at the situation, and an executive director and a board chair, or the board in general, may see things slightly different. That's okay. That's when the board and the executive director, leadership staff need to get together and talk. Okay, you need to be on the same page, because again, you don't, this, especially now 7-8 months into the pandemic, media, press, TV, newspaper get stories, and the question is, if they ask one person, they get one story. The board chair, they ask the executive director, they get a different story. No, those stories need to be together. So continuous and discussions amongst the board and the executive director are very important. So you can do that proper triage of those decision-making points. The ED may say it's urgent, and sometimes, in all honesty, it's sometimes easier to make the urgent decisions because you have to make it. You don't have time to overthink it in that sense. Sometimes make the urgent, right now decision, close the building. If it ends up in a week we don't need to, we can always reopen. But if we don't close, what happens in that week with our staff in place and residents in the lobby? Again, different weights, different balancing. But those are really your decision-making points right there in that crisis situation. What's immediate, urgent, what is very important, but can take time. So, kind of following a little further on that, do we go faster? Is everything an urgent decision? We just line them up and knock them down. Urgent decision. We're going to knock everything out in the next 2 hours. No, probably not. If you're sure, go ahead. Make the decision, lead your organization. You're going to do that as executive director, as a board anyways. You need to be the leader. You're taking that leadership role. The question then, sometimes with opening and closing in the COVID-19 was, you're a business. You can open and close your business however you want. You're a business as long as you're following state law, in discrimination, fair housing, and all those pieces, and your any kind of the public components of your state law, you can close your buildings. You're gonna do your services other means. You can lead even ahead of your city or county potentially. So if you know what you want to do, you have the information you need, make the decision, and go ahead in that shorter amount of time. That's okay. If you don't know, and it's not an urgent decision, take your time. Okay, take your time, gather the information you need to gather, have the conversations you need to have. Sometimes the conversation between the executive director, the mayor, the school board chair, what's going on. There might be a group that meets, an emergency group. As a housing authority, you need to be on that group. So again, we're in the middle of a crisis, the pandemic right now. Getting on that might be more difficult right now. But going forward, make sure you're on that emergency response team for your city, county, or your local community, because that's important, because you need to make sure you have the information you need to make your decisions, but you may also be able to provide additional information on the safety of housing and things like that to that group as well. And again, the city probably wants you to be part of that in an emergency situation. You may have to bring funding to the table in certain situations. So definitely a partnership that you need to look at. Who's on that emergency response team for your local community? Make sure you're part of that and start those conversations. That last line is important. Go as fast as you're comfortable. There's no need to rush a decision that doesn't need to be made today. If you know information is coming, wait for the information and then make the decision when the decision needs to be made. Again, once you're confident that you've made a decision and that is the way you want to go ahead and make your decision. But don't make an important decision using urgent terms and urgent processes unless you have to. Okay? Not all urgent decisions are important. Okay? Or all, and then all important decisions aren't urgent either. Okay? Take your time with those important decisions if you can. They don't necessarily have to be urgent. You can take your time with them. Okay? Again, here, crisis teams. It's not only mean you have a little community one, but within your organization, you might have one. Okay? And at a minimum, it's quite honest with you, the executive director is probably going to have their executive team or their crisis team within their agency. Larger agencies, it might be the executive director, deputy, head of public housing, head of vouchers, and head of resident services. Again, head of maintenance, if that's a separate department as well. Okay, so whatever department heads, you probably get them together first, and then you make that your core team. There might be decisions that only 2 or 3 of those 10 people need to be part of, and that's fine. Now, for a smaller housing authority, it may just be the executive director and the maintenance director, or the maintenance lead maintenance staff person. Okay. Also, once that team is in place, you're probably going to get another team as well, in the sense of the executive director and the board. Because again, oversight pieces for the board are still there, making sure there's regular communication between that board chair and the executive director at a minimum. You're going to have your board meetings. Now, most of the time, they're probably video, Zoom, or go to meetings now, but regular conversations. Again, making sure you follow your open meetings acts. Don't have decision-making meetings on the phone that aren't publicly announced if needed. Again, follow your public open meetings laws, but having lines of communication between the executive director and the board chair generally is not a meeting of the board in most situations. But again, take a look at what the Texas Open Meetings Act requires of you. But this is what those teams really start looking at. Aggregating and assimilating information. What is the information? How many, your operations staff, your public housing staff. Okay, the public housing director might bring in, our lobby usually has 4 areas where residents or the public can come up and have a conversation at the front desk. and we have 4 different staff people talking to 4 different public people. But because of this, with social distancing requirements in place, with the 6 feet between everyone, and with the plexiglass components that we need to put in place, now we can only have 2. That's important information. Because again, the executive director might say, we have 4 people up there. Do we need to buy 4 sets of plexiglass dividers? No, we need to buy 2. So that's information that's important, potentially even to the maintenance staff, who does the purchasing. So it's gathering information. Again, using the leadership teams will get together and bring the information, but even with the staff of public housing, there may be conversations and what do we need, how do we need it, when do we need it? Maintenance staff, are you only doing emergency work orders? Are you still doing regular work orders? Lots of agencies have limited the regular work orders to limit the access of the units, and that's okay. But again, emergency work orders need to still occur. If there's a major leak, if there's only 1 toilet in the unit and the toilet's clogged, someone needs to go in and resolve that as an emergency work order. What's the process for that? Because we're doing fewer work orders now, how much PPE do we need for those maintenance workers to go into those units? How do we handle those situations? Decision actions. Again, at some point, decisions need to be made. They can be done part of a team. Usually, though, the leader of the organization will make those decisions, okay, after some kind of consultation with the leadership team. But the executive director is usually the one who's making the day-to-day decisions. And that's how it was before the pandemic, before crisis, and during the crisis, okay? Unless, as an agency, you have a different person in emergency situations that is authorized to make certain decisions. But you don't want 4 department heads out there talking to a newspaper. They're just picking up the phone and calling whoever picks up, and that person is talking to the press. Coordinated efforts need to make sure they're there. There's the director of communications who may be talking to the press and coordinating discussions for the executive director to make a public statement. Okay, so again, the executive director doesn't need to be on every phone call or be part of every decision, but that delegation of authority from the executive director needs to be clear. So if you have a disaster plan and you've activated that disaster plan, make sure that's where the delegation of authority happens when needed. And that's not part of that chain of command. Again, who is in charge? Going to be the executive director, CEO of the organization, in consultation with the board chair. And the board may meet and do business as well, and that will direct where the executive director goes and what kind of work they're doing on a day-to-day basis. But also then, important decision here is what happens if that executive director needs to be quarantined for a certain amount of time and can't be actively participating in the decision making? What if they're in the hospital because of COVID-19 for whatever reasons? That decision making needs to be clearly defined. And again, a disaster plan of some sort is very important. As a key to that as well, you can have it printed, you can have it in a binder, that's fine. In this situation, it was probably okay. You're in the office, you're making the decision, do we close tomorrow, do we close next, do we not show back up on Monday and close as of Monday? You can grab that binder off the shelf, take it with you. In the natural disaster side, you may not have that. Again, you may have some planning, but do you have that information at home? You have it electronically on your tablet, your computer, on your phone. Make sure you have a disaster plan available to you at all times, because you never know when it might pop up. It may even pop up in criminal activity situations where something happens in a building, that building has to be sealed off, press and police are on the scene. What is the process? So what is that chain of command in those situations? And then, again, the disaster plan will have that information. In that process, what's your actual disaster protocol? What is the process that you're going to follow? It really is, we're trying to make it as simple as possible here. So keep it as simple and as direct, and because there's going to be enough chaos around you at certain times. Again, it's hard for us to stay in a crisis mode for 8 months. And so now it's becoming a little bit more normal in certain situations and in other ways, but there's still a crisis piece to it. And when new things come up or reevaluation has to happen, it really does make sense to do it as simply as possible to get the result, an informed result, as quickly as possible. So it's identifying the issue. What needs to happen? We need to get plexiglass dividers if we're going to keep our lobby open. Okay, what's the interest? We need to protect our staff. We need to protect our residents. And we need to make sure that we are in compliance with local ordinance or local emergency orders. Some of those risks, do we want to even have those plexiglass dividers, or do we want to close the lobby completely? What does that change? If we're mainly an elderly property, that might be difficult to close the lobby completely. You may not be able to go use technology and go electronic completely with an elderly population in your community. In very rural parts of the country, very rural parts of Texas, there may be broadband access, internet access issues, and you may not be able to do proper business electronically. So you may need to figure out some other way to conduct that business. So again, now we triage. Now we're probably not going to do it one at a time. On March 13th, March 14th, when decisions started being made, it wasn't one issue at a time. It was multiple issues. We started triaging those decisions. I can't get plexiglass here by tomorrow to put that in to keep our lobby open. Do I need to close the lobby then? So triaging those decisions. Okay, do what's the most urgent and important first. Again, you can have urgent, important decisions, but again, you're not going to have all the information you probably need to make those decisions. That's okay, and just make sure you try. Sometimes you have to revisit decisions, and that's not a problem either. Make sure your decisions can be reviewed, and it may be tomorrow, it may be next week, it may be next month, but have a review process of your decision making as well, so that things can change and things can update. Develop the options and deadlines. If I can't get those plexiglass by tomorrow, then I need to switch to plan B. Okay, and we go into a different decision. Aggregate, disseminate information. How do we tell our residents our lobby is closed tomorrow morning? Or do we only allow 2 people in our lobby at a time? Are we going to have a sign on the door? Are we going to send out an email to our residents? Are we going to post on the bulletin boards in our properties? How are we letting our residents know if you have been economically impacted, you've lost your job, lost hours, contact us. Come to our office? Maybe, maybe not. Contact us electronically? Maybe, maybe not. And what information do you need from them to do an interim recertification? And getting all the information into one place and then making sure it gets to the people it needs to get to is important. Then we start resolving. Now we start putting the decisions into action. And that's the resolution side of things. So implementing your short strategy through short-term, long-term decisions. Again, short-term, usually the urgent, longer-term, more important, but we have time. Time really is our tipping point between urgent and important. If you have more time, you can take more time and get better information. In urgent, we don't have the time. The decision has to be made today. It needs to be made this hour. You just work with the information you have at that point. And based on that, the information, what happens, are you hearing complaints from your residents for not being able to access you? Maybe, maybe not. Have you been overwhelmed with interim recertifications? Can your staff maintain that? Your staff aren't in the office potentially anymore. Do they have the information? Do they have the computer access to be able to run an interim, conduct an interim recertification completely electronically, completely independent from being in the room with the resident? Maybe, maybe not. So we're assessing those outcomes. Maybe we need more information. Maybe we need less information. HUD through the waiver process gives you lots of flexibility during this time. You need less information to verify income now than you used to. So take that into account. It makes your operations simpler, potentially, and makes it simpler for your staff to get through the process. Collaborating, we saw this a lot with PPE, personal protective equipment. Where can we get it? Where can we get hand sanitizer? Where can we get masks? Where can we get gloves? Some situations, where can we get full protective suits for our maintenance staff? Collaborating sometimes through NARO. We had weekly meetings for a long time, for about 5 of these 8 months, maybe 6 of these 8 months. We still have regular meetings from time to time. You're having this conference. We provided, Tess and I provided an update this morning on where we are with some of the COVID HUD pieces. So collaborating with your member organizations. We can, oh, this agency found that if we get a government status with our Amazon account, we then get priority in PPE distribution and purchasing. You can get a business account through a different vendor, and talk to your current vendors. Make sure are you a first responder? In most situations, housing authorities are considered first responders, and get that first responder status when purchasing PPE that's in short supply. You put in that into that category and have better access than most. Maybe not as good as access as hospitals, but better access than most. So again, talking to your other agencies, talking with your state entity, Texas Neuro, talking to your region, Southwest Neuro, talking to national. We can sometimes be helpful. And then also talking to your community partners, whether it's the city, county, whether it's other service providers for your residents, food providers. You can pay for the transportation of food and services to your residents, but you can't buy the food itself using CARES Act funds. Some of those, how do we make sure our residents who now have to stay inside, have to stay in their units, still have access to the food that they need, particularly our elderly youth, families and disabled families. Excellent. Okay. Coming to the key stakeholders. We've talked about some, and again, sometimes the values will change. So some of those key stakeholders, let's talk about them and making sure these partnerships and just sometimes who we work with on a regular basis. Who are some of the people we tend to work with on a daily basis? Our staff, that's kind of the entity, count that as the housing authority. Our residents. Our residents are a stakeholder in our work. They receive the benefit of a lot of the work that we do. Some of it might also be service providers. Meals on Wheels. How has that changed? How is that? How are they working with you? Maybe food banks. Are there local food distribution centers that are different? Some of the again, categories you kind of see here, looking for expertise. If you need help with maintenance, or cleanup. A lot of times, now we've heard a lot about cleaning. What if you have a family who had COVID-19 or an individual had COVID-19? What do we do with that unit? I'm not going to do with that family. How do we move the family to another unit? But how do we clean and how do we do that deep cleaning? Sometimes we use another company that has expertise in deep cleaning and medical cleaning that may be needed. A commitment, making sure they're your partner. They're there when you need them. You're there when they need. You're there when they need you. Again, very important that you both share values, committed to the work that you're doing, and you're gonna find a way to make it work. Yeah, it may not be the same as you've done it before. It may look different. It may feel different. It may sound different. Everything may be different about it. But you have the goal to make sure those Meals on Wheels get delivered, and they might get delivered only to the front door. They may not go inside the units anymore. And maybe that's hard. That's sometimes some of the only conversation of elderly individuals may get for a day. But we're trying to make it safe and make sure it works for everyone. Transparency, make sure we're sharing information that's relevant to the work that's being done. Okay, so everyone can make the proper decisions. Again, decisions are the key here. The making sure your partners give you the information you need to make your decisions as quickly as possible, whether they're urgent or important, and making sure you're providing the information that you have potentially to your residents, that we're not going to open our lobby is closed. Our lobby is closed. We're finding a different way of making sure that you're getting the information and the resources that you have. Most important, that's why I saw all caps there, having empathy. This is difficult for everyone. We are all doing something different. We all have, even amongst our own staff, our staffs are in three different locations. Myself, I work very closely with Tess Embry, and then I have Eric and Tushar in my office as well. So the four of us, we're right now in 4 different states, 4 different areas. I'm in Maryland. Tess is actually out on the West Coast in Washington. Eric's in Virginia, and Tushar's in Washington, D.C. Okay, in the area, 3 of us are in the area, but we're different places. Coordinating that, making sure we have access. Understanding that some people have different, we work on everyone's time. We're on West Coast time sometimes for meetings because to make things work, to make it, we wouldn't normally do that. We try to work it so we're in general business hours, but now we may have to do that after-hour meeting and make sure, that the information is getting to where it needs to be at the right time. So we need to make sure we have empathy with our residents. We ask our residents to have empathy with us and work with us as well, and the total community. Again, very important. The community can be there as well. We do have a question that popped up. Let me see. Please advise on how housing authorities as essential workers can be classified as first responders. Generally, it's the essential. It depends on your state and your local community. A lot of times, essential workers, the classification of first responder essential worker is equivalent, depending on the situation. And so in that case, there may be priorities within that. So again, EMS, fire, police may get a higher ranking over housing authority. But there's a executive director in New Jersey that sometimes says this. Housing authorities tend to be in front of the front line. We're dealing with where people live, okay? People go to the hospital. People, go to the police station. People go, the fire departments come to them. Housing is before a lot of this, of the first responder side of things. But yeah, the confusion was, I'm using essential workers, workforce, and first responder interchangeably for the conversation. So a lot of the Amazon, I believe, does, other supply companies, you get that essential worker status or first responder status. And again, it could be different, but try to get the highest status you can get the highest priority that you can get with your supplier. And that is the most important piece of it. Excellent. All right, a couple more slides here. Let's make sure we knock these out. Again, communication skills. I talked a little bit about it before, making sure this is a crisis or an emergency communication plan. Very, very important. Again, everyone is under stress. Who is speaking for your agency? Who has the authority to speak for your agency? And more important than that, make sure everyone else knows they don't have the authority to speak for your agency. That they should not, if they get questions about agency activities, that they should refer those questions to the communications department, to the executive director, but not to respond to those, thank you for your question. I need to send you over to, Tim Smith, and they'll be able to help you out with getting that information. And that is always the most important part of a communication plan. Who has the authority to speak in those situations? Again, it may not always be the executive director. In a maintenance situation, it may be a maintenance director who has better knowledge of the maintenance side of things than an operational piece that the executive director may have. But then other questions you need to look at. Again, who are you talking to? Okay, being specific about labeling the key stakeholder groups to identify their values. Again, are you talking to your residents? Are you talking to your landlords? That's a very different conversation right now. Your landlords are in a tough situation in the voucher program right now. The CDC eviction order lets the tenant give the landlord a declaration and they no longer have to pay rent. But your landlord coming to you, what's going on? You are, in a sense, sometimes a lifeline for those landlords as well. You'll probably keep paying your HAP payment, your housing assistance payment, to the landlord. In the private sector, the landlord doesn't have that. They only have the tenant paying the lease. In vouchers, there is the voucher portion. So what is the conversation you're having with your landlords? And this may be an opportunity to solidify that relationship with your landlords. Again, potentially even bring in new landlords into the program because there's, I put this in quotes, guaranteed rent. Yeah, we all know the process, rent calculations and HAP contracts and all that. But as a basic conversation, we're as sure a thing of paying the rent as can be in most situations. Okay, and that's an issue now. Again, what are you telling them? What are you telling those landlords? What are you telling your tenants? What are you telling your mayor? What does the mayor need to know about your housing authority operations and your running of your agency at this time? Again, different conversations, maybe different people, but a conversation that probably needs to be had with the leadership teams. Again, is the mayor contacting the board chair? And that might be appropriate, but making sure the executive director and the board chair have spoken so both have the same information and providing the same information. Here's the housing authority position. It's not the board chair's position. It's not the executive director's position. You're speaking on behalf of the agency, and this is the agency position. That's what you're telling them, not individual thoughts, but agency thoughts when it's agency business. What are they hearing then? So again, you can say what you want to say, but how is it landing? You know, what are they actually hearing? If you're giving the same conversation, the same information in the same fashion to a landlord and to a tenant, it's going to land very differently. So you do need to tailor your message. Again, you're not saying different things to different people. You're not lying to one and telling the truth to another. You're molding your message to make sure it gets the point across that you're trying to make. Okay? That's fully acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, you may have a different conversational style with residents than you do with the mayor. That's okay as well. You know, we want to make sure that the information is understood and that if there's questions, we can respond to those questions as well. Again, so sometimes we can try to anticipate questions. You know, what will be our residents' concerns here when I bring this to them? What will be our landlord's concerns? What will be our staff's concerns? We need to share information with our staff as well, and we got to make sure that two-way street of communication is solid as well. So again, communication, key in crisis management. Always, sometimes it's more important than actually what you're doing. You know, having that line of communication open, even with the press, even with TV, you know, with the mayor, with city council, with the state, maybe with the governor. You know, part of the conversation now is there's some state and local money that's come from the Treasury Department, U.S. Treasury Department. That's different than the housing authority money. Some housing authorities have been able to use their relationship with the state or the local community that's receiving these funds to work with them to provide rental assistance to even non-assisted families. So that's an additional source of income for the agency that normally wouldn't be there. Okay. So again, identify the best media to reach your key stakeholders. Again, sometimes it's the executive director picking up the phone. Other times it might be a press release. Here, get this to the newspaper. Get this press release out to the newspaper. Here's what our emergency, you know, we've decided to close. Here are our steps to make sure our residents have access to the information and the staff that they need. And create that central authoritative source for your information about your organization. Again, try to have a unified message. It doesn't always have to be a unified source. The less people speaking on behalf of the agency, the better. But again, there may be appropriate times when certain individuals should be the ones speaking with a certain audience. That's okay. You know, sometimes if it's the property manager may be the right person to speak to that property's residents. With maybe the executive director there, they're going to give the overview, and then the property manager will provide some comments as well, because that's the connection point. The residents don't know the executive director. They don't see the executive director every day. They see that property manager every day, and they've built that relationship. You can take advantage of those relationships to make sure that information gets across. Okay, this is interesting. If you do marketing on a regular basis, as a housing authority, we don't always do that. We probably should do more. Whether, you know, sometimes we deal with negative situations. Other times we have positive situations that we just don't extol our own virtues that often. We need to make sure that we you know, say what's good is going on. We've probably suspended those, good or bad, initially. And we're dealing on a case-by-case basis what we're going to discuss moving forward. So again, not a problem at this point. We kind of, now we stopped our newsletter. We went from a electronic and paper version of our newsletter, the Monitor that members get. We stopped the paper version for about 6 months. Our last edition, September 30th. That last edition was our first one that went back into print and we mailed out to housing authorities. Again, there are certain things that you may be able to cut back on to save money. But also, if people aren't in their offices, why are you sending information to people's offices when maybe an email makes more sense? Again, what's the right message and what's the right vehicle for that message? Definitely important. Okay, as we kind of get to our last slides here before we, again, open it up for more questions, again, feel free to drop questions in the chat. This is what I like to say, kind of remember your why. Why are you doing this? Why are we here? Why are we working in affordable housing? Very few of us went to school, grew up saying, I want to provide affordable housing. I want to work in a housing authority. I want to be part of an affordable housing program and helping low-income individuals. Okay? You might have had the conversation, I want to be able to help people when I grow up. But was it affordable housing? It wasn't for me. I stumbled into this a little bit, and that's okay. I like real estate. And then I joined the housing authority, became a commissioner of the housing authority. And then I made sometimes you make connections and you get that connection point. But why are you doing this? And again, here's some pictures here. Just really looking at why do we do what we do? Here we have, some kids prepping for school, a homework piece, music class with the kids, helping families get into housing. Sometimes whether it's the first apartment that they've had, coming out of homelessness or coming out of housing uncertainty, even all the way up to home ownership. But again, we need to sometimes step back. That's okay. It's been a crazy 6, 7, 8 months. It's going to keep going. I probably am. We're still looking at, can we go into the office? Or are we going to go back to regular operations? Probably not before the end of the year. Some of your agencies are up and running fully 100%. That's great. But still, there's stress involved in that. You probably have some mechanism in place still to protect against, to help with social distancing. You're probably not meeting with residents in an office. All right, there's either plexiglass or some kind of divider, or you're meeting from across the room to have discussions. Now our training courses, we went online with the majority of them. Our normal in-person classes, we created them and made them into online courses. We're just starting to go back to live sessions, but then we have to make sure we have all the safety precautions in place. People wearing masks, social distancing, all those components. Those details can sometimes, we get bogged down in those details. And again, from time to time, whether it's once a day, once a week, when it just happens to feel right, step back, take a look, take a deep breath, look at the big picture. Are we still doing our mission? Look at our websites, look at our mission statements. Are we helping families, low-income families, achieve their housing opportunities? And I gotta say, yes, we are. But we do need to look at that from time to time just to make sure we stay centered and we continue moving forward in the discussion. It's a great opportunity. Again, we're providing immense services and needed services. As housing authorities, you're on the front line. Again, like I said, the executive director in New Jersey said, you're in front of the front line. You're doing great work. Your residents really do appreciate it. We appreciate National NARO. Congress appreciates it. HUD appreciates it. I can tell you HUD appreciates it. I've talked to HUD about it. HUD knows this is difficult times. HUD wants to make sure you have the opportunities, you have the resources, and is trying to get out of the way as much as possible to make sure you can do what you need to do in these times in a safe manner. Again, your residents being safe, your staff being safe, always important. So again, going to that decision-making process, having that discussion, always, always very important. Let's go ahead. Any questions that have come up? Let's take a look here for a second. A couple of questions I see just on a different platform here. Looking at, again, the urgent and the important decision-making points. Again, how do we sometimes make those decisions? How do we categorize? And it really is what needs to be done first. Again, prioritization is always going to be your important. And you're always going to prioritize based on time initially. That is the simplest way of doing it. Some kind of priority based on time. Does that decision need to be made today because something needs to be shipped out tonight? If I make a decision in the next 2 hours, the plexiglass dividers can be shipped out tonight. They can be done overnight, and they can be in the office by 8:30 tomorrow morning. We can install them. We can open a couple hours late, but we can still open our office with the safety precautions between residents and the staff. Sometimes that's a decision. If you decide, no, that's not a decision I'm going to make, then it transitions. Now I may have to decide to close the office until we have a different decision-making point, and that's fine as well. So decisions can change their stripes. In urgent decisions, if they're not made immediately, that's okay. The question is, does it cause more trouble by not making a decision? Are we creating a bigger problem? That's what we want to be problem solvers. Okay, as in any activity that we're doing, we're trying to minimize the problems. Okay, because think about it. If there weren't issues to deal with, most of us probably wouldn't have a job. Most jobs are some kind of problem solving. So don't make the problem worse. How do we make sure we safely have our residents in place, have our staff in place? And sometimes it means closing for a day or two while we get things in place to do that. Other times, it can be done more quickly. Other times, like in our office, we've gone to a voluntary staffing with only 8 staff in the building at a time. So, we have over 25 staff in the DC office. But we can't have any more than 8, so we got to coordinate schedules if we're going to go into the office. And that may be the same situation you sometimes have in with your agencies as well. Some agencies went onto kind of A-B schedules. Half the staff comes in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The other half of the staff comes on Tuesday, Wednesday, week 1. And then B is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, week 2. A is Tuesday, Thursday. Again, that way, if something happens and we do have an outbreak, especially of COVID-19 in the office, hopefully it can be contained just to the A staff or just to the B staff, and then we still are able to operate. Lots of different, we've seen that numerous times, and probably even in areas where there's still closed offices, we'll probably see that as part of the transition as well. But again, a lot of you are in the office, a lot of you are at home. Lots of great work is being done and making sure that information, keeping your staff informed can sometimes be half the battle when you're with a remote staff like that. Let's take a look. While we're here, let me go ahead and do this. Just so we have the information, this is my contact information. Again, I'm George Urbana. I have Tess Embry's information up here as well from the congressional side. Feel free to email either of us, particularly for HUD issues, email me. Congressional issues, please feel free to email Tess. Lots of links there. The NARO blog, always great for hot topics and making sure you have the latest information from HUD and other agencies in Congress. There, a lot of the resources that we spoke with, the HUD pieces and other agency pieces, will be on our coronavirus page. This is a resource that we've put together, pulling information from lots of different places across the federal spectrum. Not just HUD, Department of Labor, Department of Treasury, and a few others as well that somehow got involved. CDC now into the discussion. Treasury Department is in there as well. So please feel free, naro.org/coronavirus. You'll see NARO resources as well. Eligible use documents, how do you determine if you can spend money on certain things based on the CARES Act? All that information is there as well. Our advocacy site is also there available to you. Both coronavirus page and advocacy are open to the public, so feel free to share that information as well. But naro.org/advocacy really helps Tess and helps there for the rest of us at NARO and members across the board in making sure you're sharing your stories with members of Congress and the administration. Okay, you can go there. There's a number of letters that we sent to Congress. In the month of August, we sent over 13,000 letters from NARO members to members of Congress and the administration. It's there. You can click on those and send those letters to members of Congress. Again, any questions, feel free to put in the chat. We'll get to them in just a moment. But I do just want to, as a conclusion, as kind of wrapping things up, just, again, the main concepts, the big picture ideas here. We're leaders. We're problem solvers. We're leaders. We're taking that step going forward. Realize that we appreciate all the hard work you're doing. You're doing a great job. You're stepping into the role. You're leaders, whether by choice or by need. You're all leaders right now in your communities, and that's very important, not only for you, for your staff, for your residents, for your community. Look at those values. Look at your mission statement if you have questions. But what are those values that you need to make sure you're following and are driving your actions? And that will help you decide the decision making. Okay? You have those values as an organization. You get your team together, all those leaders, all your department heads, whoever is going to make those decisions, get them in there, make those decisions, triaging your decision-making process. What's urgent? What's important? What can wait? What has allowed a waiver to, let's push that off into next month or next year in some situations. Okay? All those decision-making process, identify, contain, resolve, very basic, going through those pieces step by step. And again, build trust. Your residents already trust you. They don't always feel that way, but they do. Okay, you're their landlords, you're their voucher providers. They do have the layer of trust there. Make sure not to do anything to break that trust, but also so making sure you're providing information, you're making sure you're accessible, and it may be very different accessibility than it was back in February of this year. That's okay. Things change, and we need to do that. And just remember why you're doing it. So kind of going back to the top. Use our mission. What's our mission? Making sure we're providing those affordable housing services and other life services to our residents and to our community. We're an anchor for our community. We are trustworthy. We have people come to us for information to be able to provide the need for the community. So again, thank you for all the hard work that you're doing. A lot of this might sound like a pep talk, and I think that's good. Sometimes we need a pep talk. I know I do sometimes. Hopefully that helped a little bit. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, but have a process in place. Take it step by step. You don't have to do this alone. We're here to help. Your teams are there to help. Your communities are there to help, but have a process in place, and there's nothing we can do but be successful. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Georgie. Okay, everybody, I am going to share the game code for this session. If you'll take that down, make sure you put it in. You'll receive your points for the game. I'll leave that up for just a few moments here so you can all write it down.
There it is. So good luck with the conference next couple of days as well. Looks like there's lots of great sessions out there. Again, we wish we could do this in person, but hopefully next year.
Hopefully. We definitely enjoyed having you, Georgie.
Thanks, guys.
All right. And I'll see everybody in their next sessions.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.